My wife deceived me with my own brother. The child I thought was mine turned out to be his. Betrayed by my own blood, I chose my path toward payback. Even now, when I look back, it's astonishing how much my life has transformed. Once upon a time, in the tranquil little town of Elkwood, everything felt clear and predictable. My family was far from perfect, but I believed we stood together when it counted. My younger brother, Ethan, had a knack for finding trouble, but he was still my brother, and I loved him. I never dreamed that the world I knew would crumble all because of him. I made my living as a mechanic, helping my father, Frank, run our network of auto shops. I was married to my high school sweetheart, Alyssa, and for a while, life felt right. But that peaceful life unraveled in ways I never saw coming. Alyssa and I had been married a handful of years when everything spun out of control. Ethan, ever the trouble seeker, sank deeper into harmful habits, and my parents began enabling him in ways that tore me apart inside. Against all my protest, they insisted he live under our roof, just for a while, so he could attend a rehabilitation program. I felt forced into letting him stay. That single decision destroyed everything I valued, my sense of family, my understanding of love, and any illusions of security I once held. The day it all came crashing down started like any other. Our backyard was filled with old friends and co-workers, the air thick with barbecue smoke. The gathering was in my honor, celebrating my promotion to lead mechanic at my father's main shop. Yet, I sensed it was more a farewell than a proper party. My emotions were in turmoil, knowing a storm was coming. At one point, I slipped away from the crowd, preparing for the moment I'd say my goodbyes. I walked to my pickup, collecting a hidden item I thought I might need, a prop, of sorts, for the speech everyone expected me to give. The hum of conversation drifted across the yard, but my mind was somewhere else. I spotted my boss, Mason Young, approaching with his wife, Barbara. Mason was an imposing figure with a warm smile. Despite nearing his mid-50s, he had a strong presence that demanded respect but also put folks at ease. Barbara, on the other hand, had a friendly, motherly energy, though she had the unfortunate tendency to meddle in people's personal affairs. I used to think she was harmless. Now, I saw her in a different light. For the last several months, she'd decided to help by trying to push me back into a relationship, one I wanted no part of. She just wouldn't take my refusal seriously. She claimed she had found the perfect woman for me. Naturally, that perfect woman was, in fact, my ex-wife, Alyssa. Barbara knew bits and pieces of my divorce story, but not enough to appreciate why seeing Alyssa was like setting my wounds on fire. She'd ignored every boundary I set. That evening, sure enough, Alyssa was there at the party. Dressed immaculately, with long blonde hair and that familiar glow, she looked just like she did the day I first fell in love with her. The sight filled me with both longing and fury. She'd always been skilled at captivating people, especially those who didn't know her hidden thorns. As soon as I laid eyes on her, all the old pain reignited. Mason invited me to address the group, so I took a breath and steeled myself. This was no ordinary acceptance speech. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice tight. I know this was supposed to be a party, a celebration of my promotion. Well, in a way, it still is. Mason offered me the position of lead mechanic, and I appreciate it. But, sir, I have to decline because, as of tonight, I quit. Yes, it's sudden, and I'm sorry. I'll understand if you don't want to provide a reference. But I'm leaving, no matter what. Shocked silence fell over the backyard. Mason stared at me, speechless. Barbara tried to interject something, tears already glistening, but I shook my head, my tone sharp. I owe Mason an explanation, no one else. Certainly not certain individuals in this yard who ignored my repeated requests to keep out of my personal life. Alyssa began sobbing softly. For a moment, pity flickered through me, but it vanished as I remembered what she had done. I cleared my throat, decided that if she and the others wanted a spectacle, I would oblige. Let me tell you a story, I said, swallowing the storm within me. I wasn't always this angry, believe it or not. I married Alyssa after high school. She was everything I wanted, sweet, clever, my best friend. We settled into our first little house, living paycheck to paycheck while I labored in my dad's shop, and she built a clientele at a beauty salon. I paused, noticing how Alyssa's cheeks paled as she fought back tears. For a while, it was perfect, I continued, voice echoing into the hush. Until a serpent slithered into our little Eden, my brother, Ethan. He's 3 years younger than me, and he fell into bad habits so deep my parents could barely keep their heads above water. They doted on him, did anything to shield him, even at my expense. So, about 3 years into my marriage, Ethan lost his place to stay. My parents asked if he could move in with me and my wife, just until he got into another rehab. Instantly, I said no. You can call that heartless if you like, but you haven't lived a lifetime stepping aside for your younger brother's issues. My refusal didn't matter to my parents or Alyssa. They pressed me until I gave in. And the thanks I got for that kindness? Well, a few weeks later, my wife confessed she was expecting a child, and I foolishly believed I was the father. When the baby developed a certain medical complication, a doctor mentioned that these issues sometimes happen in babies whose parents struggle with harmful substances. At first, I was baffled, but I trusted Alyssa. I tried to push the worry away, until I started to see the cracks. Eventually, after the baby was born, I had a test done. That test confirmed I was not the father, Ethan was. My voice, trembling with rage, filled the still evening air. Barbara pressed a hand to her mouth. A few others wore stricken expressions, but none looked more devastated than Alyssa. I lost my mind, I admitted. I wanted to find Ethan, to unleash my fury on him. But he'd run off or been hidden away, my parents made sure of that. They'd known all along. They'd covered for him, choosing him over me, once again. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to remain in control. I served Alyssa divorce papers immediately. She tried apologizing, tried explaining it was just a horrible mistake. But I was too shattered to listen. My family hounded me to be the bigger man and forgive. My father told me he was disappointed in me for refusing to move on. I told him the feeling was mutual. Then, I left. I packed what I could and disappeared to Maplewood, a few hours away. Later, I crossed into Northbridge County for a fresh start. But I never could outrun the memories. I lifted the corner of my shirt, revealing an object tucked into my belt. No one said a word, though I heard a few gasps. Don't worry, I said coldly, I'm not harming anyone here. But you see this? It's the only thing that makes me feel safe now. Because time and again, folks like you, I shot a glare at Barbara, think you know what's best for me. You drag my ex-wife back into my life, never mind that I told you all I want is to be left alone. Alyssa sobbed louder. I set my little prop aside, since I'd made my point. Long story short, I told them, I discovered Alyssa had traced me down. She moved here to Redfield a few months ago. She made friends who believed her sob story. Enter Barbara, who decided it was her mission to bring two supposed soulmates back together. So here we are. Only problem is, she was never my soulmate, at least, not after what she did. I turned to Alyssa, her face blotchy from crying. Stop following me, I said, voice low. Stop showing up. Stop lying to everyone about how we're star-crossed lovers. You lost that right the day you betrayed me. She whispered my name, Logan, over and over, begging me to come home, insisting she couldn't live without me. My heart twisted, remembering how I'd once adored her. But that was gone. The trust was gone. There is no home for us, Alyssa, I said, finality in my tone. There hasn't been for a long time. Without another word, I strode through the stunned crowd, climbed into my truck, and drove off. The last sound I heard was Alyssa's broken wail, calling my name into the evening sky. I know many people believe I'm the villain in this tale, and in some ways, I am. I hurt the only person I ever truly loved. How could he forgive me for lying about the child, for sleeping with his brother, for turning his world upside down? Writing is supposed to help me find clarity. Or so the doctors say. But each word is a dagger, reminding me of the life I destroyed. To understand how I got here, you need to know how Logan and I began. We were teenage sweethearts in Elkwood. The first time Logan kissed me, I felt like I belonged in a fairy tale. He was a sophomore, I was a freshman, and I quickly learned no one could compare to him in my eyes. He was my world. We married not long after I graduated. Though our money was scarce, our devotion made us richer than I ever imagined. That harmony cracked when his younger brother, Ethan, lost his place to live and had nowhere else to turn. Logan's parents, Frank and Diane, begged us to let Ethan stay. Logan's refusal was immediate and emphatic. But I felt sympathy, for Ethan and for my in-laws, who were trying so hard to save him from the spiral he was in. Against Logan's wishes, we let Ethan move in for a short while. A few nights later, Logan was working late, and I came home to find the living room hazy with the remains of some illicit smoke. Ethan was in a gloomy state, speaking darkly about feeling worthless. My heart ached for him. I offered comfort, then everything blurred. I wish I could say I didn't know what I was doing, but the truth is, I was confused, a bit lightheaded from the lingering haze, and my judgment was clouded by pity. Ethan saw my concern as an invitation. He whispered that he'd never known the warmth of a good-hearted woman. That he'd never found someone to believe in him. I tried to push away, but not firmly enough. A terrible moment of weakness led us beyond any line we should have drawn. Regret flooded me the instant it happened. I vowed it would never occur again. A few weeks later, Ethan moved out. Not long after that, I discovered I was expecting. At first, I fully believed the child was Logan's. Our marriage was full of closeness, it made perfect sense. But then Ethan dropped a hint that left me chilled, the possibility that the baby could be his. My in-laws found out, and together, they decided to keep it secret, praying Logan wouldn't suspect. But the baby was born with a health problem, something that forced the truth into the light. Logan demanded a test. When he saw the results, the color drained from his face. He kicked me out that very day. My parents turned their backs on me, too, so I ended up living with Frank and Diane. They tried to mediate, but Logan was deaf to my pleas. I couldn't blame him. I spiraled into despair. I considered ending everything, my regret, my heartbreak. It led me to a hospital stay, and even after I recovered, Logan refused to speak to me. The divorce followed, swift and brutal. I was left alone, with a baby whose very presence reminded me of my betrayal. Frank and Diane took the child in, while I tried, and failed, to pull my life together. Eventually, I tracked Logan down in Maplewood, then in Northbridge County, even after he got a restraining order. Love or obsession, maybe both, drove me to seek another reunion. If only I could make him see how sorry I was. But it was no use. He ran again and settled in Redfield. When I found him there, I tried a gentler approach, making friends in town until I met Barbara. She, too, believed in second chances. Maybe because I told her only enough to rouse her sympathy, leaving out the worst details. We hoped to arrange a peaceful chat at that party. Of course, it exploded in my face. That night, when Logan stormed away, shouting for me to leave him alone, I realized what a fool I'd been. I'd held on to hope for too long, refusing to accept the wreckage I'd caused. I collapsed into tears, and the next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital, placed under watch. My heart felt hollow. I'd lost Logan. And I feared I'd never find a way to forgive myself. A few weeks after that disastrous cookout, my mind was nowhere close to calm. The promotion I'd declined and my job I'd quit, both seemed inconsequential. I was haunted by Alyssa's sobs, by memories of what we once had. I told myself I hated her, but part of me still felt that old, painful love. Late at night, I would have a surge of memories, of how we laughed, how we dreamed. It was enough to tear me in two. Then a single text shattered my world once more. Alyssa ended her own life. My first response was pure disbelief. She was so stubborn, so persistent, so convinced we were meant to be. How could she do this? Yet, the more I learned, the more it made grim sense. I stared at my phone's screen, dread winding through me, a slow, tightening coil. Guilt, anger, sorrow, all battled in my chest. I had no words, no tears. Only one thought slid into focus. My brother did this, too. If Ethan hadn't pursued her. If he hadn't let jealousy drive him to tear down everything I built. She might have lived. Everything might have been different. Something inside me clicked, a terrible calm descending. I mailed 2 letters. One went to my parents, Frank and Diane. I told them I knew they'd go on caring for my nephew, my brother's child, once I was finished dealing with Ethan. The second letter went to Ethan himself, containing a battered old ring box. Inside were the crushed fragments of my wedding rings, one solitary bullet and a 3-word note. Time to run. I wanted him afraid. I wanted him to understand this was the consequence of what he'd done. Sure enough, he panicked. My phone blew up with messages from my parents, threats, pleas, condemnation. They insisted Ethan had changed. He'd been through rehab, he was clean, trying to be better. None of that mattered to me. I set my phone to silent and started driving, heading back toward the old territory with one purpose in mind. I arrived in Elkwood under the cloak of night, lodging at a tired motel on the outskirts. By day, I rested, by night, I scoured old haunts, searching for a sign of Ethan. I wasn't gentle in my inquiries, but I kept my actions quiet enough not to attract official trouble. I learned that Ethan was indeed back at my parents' home, attempting a new start. He rarely ventured out alone. My folks guarded him like precious cargo. Still, everyone must leave the nest sometime. On the 3rd night, I spotted him leaving a local hangout by himself. I watched from a distance as he ambled to his car, head down, possibly fighting the same hopelessness he once used to manipulate my wife. Once again, he seemed oblivious to the approaching footsteps behind him, mine. I caught him off guard, muffling his scream before he could utter my name. It was startling how easy it was to overwhelm him. He'd lost weight, looked frail. I remember a fleeting thought, does this even feel like justice anymore? But the memory of Alyssa's tear-streaked face burned in my mind, and it fueled me forward. I bound him, drove him far outside the city limits, beyond the highways, into the vast emptiness of a desert region that seemed to stretch endlessly, baked by a relentless sun. Under that star-dusted night sky, I found an abandoned spot, the wind rustling the scrub. I waited for him to regain consciousness, arms folded across my chest. When he finally blinked awake, confusion spiraled in his eyes. "Ethan," I murmured, calm as I could manage, "this is where it ends, one way or another." His breath came in gasps, panic clawing at him. But I no longer felt raw fury. Instead, I felt numb, like a traveler stepping outside his body. I offered him water in a single container and something else, a small syringe of tranquilizing substance. "This can keep you from feeling pain," I told him. "Or you can end it faster. Your choice. If you want to try stumbling out of here and finding a road, go ahead. We're hundreds of miles into nowhere. Maybe you'll beat the odds." Ethan's eyes told me he understood the meaning. I was casting him out into a merciless wilderness, letting fate decide if he survived. He stammered half-formed apologies, trembling violently. I stepped away, heading to my truck. As the engine roared to life, I watched him in the rearview mirror, a silhouette under the cruel moonlight. My heart hammered with a mix of triumph and something like sorrow. I drove off, leaving him and the scorching days to come. 5 days later, I was arrested. Someone had reported Ethan missing, and suspicion fell on me. Yet, the authorities found no evidence. I'd left no digital trace, used cash, and my motel manager, an old acquaintance I'd once helped, provided a rock-solid alibi. Ethan's body eventually turned up in the desert. They said he perished from the elements, combined with a possible relapse. My lawyers painted him as a troubled soul who wandered off to chase old temptations. With no proof that I had forced him into the wasteland, I went free. My parents never spoke to me again. My mother, Diane, lamented the loss of both her sons, one physically gone, the other morally dead in her eyes. My father simply stared at me with silent reproach the last time we stood in the same room. They took in Ethan's child, Alyssa's baby, and raised him. Perhaps they felt it was their penance, or maybe just their burden to bear. 6 months rolled by. I returned to Elkwood for reasons I can't fully name, maybe closure, or maybe the faint hope of reclaiming the life I'd lost. With the small inheritance left from my father's partial settlement, I opened a modest repair shop on the town's edge. Working on engines kept my hands busy, my mind focused. Each day, I rose with the sunrise, pulling battered trucks and rusted sedans back from the brink. It was good, honest labor. That's when Sarah came along with her beat-up station wagon. She was a single mother juggling 2 part-time jobs. The car gave her trouble every other week, which meant she visited me often. At first, it was all practical talk, the state of her spark plugs, which belts needed changing. Eventually, we opened up, cautiously, but steadily, about our lives. She never poked into my past. She seemed to sense the walls I had put up. As time passed, I offered small kindnesses, picking her up when she was stranded, trimming her overgrown hedges on the weekend. She laughed easily around me, a sound I realized I hadn't heard in forever, light, genuine laughter. Her young son, Timmy, took a liking to me too, waddling around the shop with big curious eyes. The first day he called me by name felt like a gentle nudge from the universe. Maybe I wasn't meant to stay angry forever. We started sharing dinners, sometimes at her little home, sometimes picking up food from the single diner still operating on Elkwood's Main Street. Little by little, an unfamiliar warmth began filling the hollow place in my chest. For the first time since Alyssa's betrayal, I dared to believe I might have a second chance at something like love. I still carry shadows in my heart. There are nights I dream of the desert, with Ethan's figure vanishing behind me. Nights I hear Alyssa's final sob echoing in my mind, accusing me, or pleading for forgiveness I couldn't grant. But each morning, I wake to the hum of an engine that needs fixing, a customer waiting for help, a neighbor waving hello, and sometimes, Sarah offering me that easy, hopeful smile. Healing comes slowly, but it comes. My story is stained by regret, heartbreak, and the darkest impulses I never thought I had. Yet in the quiet hours of dawn, as I open the shop, I remind myself, I'm still here. Life continues, in all its raw ache and lingering possibility. Perhaps that is redemption enough.